Okay.
It is Wednesday, November 6th, and here we are. We didn't think last time we met we'd know anything. Unfortunately, we do. I would just like to frame it Jewishly, and this is how I don't want to start crying.
Oh.
This is how I framed it for my kids. Oh, here it is. Rabbi Tarfon used to say, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin or bat chorin lehivatel mimena. You are not obliged to finish the task, but neither are you free to desist from it.
Oh.
So.
Oh, you're gonna start.
We can't, no crying in book club. This is the biggest book club I've had. This is the most people who have attended.
We need to be together.
We need to be together. And Lynn Salad couldn't make it. And I told her last time, listen, you have to come to keep us online so that you know, so that we're not always talking about, let's put, oh, that's not going, all right. So I put this. Okay. Oh, I'm just gonna spotlight me again.
We'll just all say we went to a cry fest this morning.
Right.
It's, yeah, I mean, yeah. Today.
So, you know, I'm not sure what else to say. Sue said, what does Rabbi say every day? Zeh Hayom. This is the day that God has made and we will rejoice. And we're going to have to see what happens. I'm going to read what Evie wrote. I can't wait. Our son Dave, who I met this summer at camp, has not, because your grandsons were there, has not been home since early August, as he is the head of the advanced team, only home for high holidays. I can only feel heartache. This was an endeavor of passion and determination. A week at a time in Las Vegas, Wisconsin, Texas, ending last night with a rally in Philadelphia. We're Facebook friends, so I saw him post about that. I just can't imagine the exhaustion and depletion. I need to focus on our pride for the monumental effort and the fear of becoming who we are. So I think that it's going to be a long couple of weeks. Evie said, intersperse some laughter. Life is with people and necessary laughter. I'm going to try. In 2016, I started watching Hallmark movies. And I will be back to Hallmark this week for sure. Happy ending guaranteed.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I think that it's, you know, we're going to have to wait and regroup and see what happens. And you know
what's going to happen.
Right. I mean, we do have a preview. Sue said, Wellick said, we know what's going to happen. And we, you know, we're lucky that we in Illinois live in a blue bubble. You know, Brad was elected, Bob Morgan. So we have to be thankful for that. Yeah, Judy, real loud, real loud.
I found it very odd that Netanyahu got rid of the head of his defense team yesterday.
Yeah.
The timing made me feel he had some knowledge. Because you don't get rid of someone like that on the day of election in the US.
Yeah.
And that was very disturbing to me.
Yeah.
It was very disturbing. It was Yoav Gallant. Many people liked him. He was liked, I think, by both sides. I don't know why. And the thing that upset me the most about that is one of the people in his cabinet, Ben Gvir, who is a right-wing crazy, was excited about it.
Yep.
So, we're, we'll have to see what unfolds in Israel, what unfolds all over the world. And, many of us follow the news. I don't want to say compulsively. My mother does. And, we're going to have to turn it off.
Yes.
I think we've learned that we have to turn it off. That it just recycles, it forces the bubble that we're in.
Vanessa,
Yes, Sue, real loud.
I heard this morning, I did turn on Morning Joe when I got the news to hear what they were saying. And they said that the Democrats have really just kind of done it all wrong. And they've got to get rid of the progressive wing of their party and become more centered. And that they really kind of blamed the bad job the Democrats did for this happening. And the other thing they talked about was social media.
Yeah.
And all these
I'm
people
leaving.
who only get their news on social media and they believe all the lies they hear.
Yeah.
And that's a real danger for our elections.
Sue,
Danger for
my
our whole
son
country.
is a lawyer. He used to ask when he was going for a jury, how do you get your news? People would say the Tribune or the Sun-Times that tells them that. Now they say TikTok or
Right.
Instagram.
Right.
Reads anymore.
Yeah, yeah. No one gets newspapers.
No. But we are going to go to our booklet and it is, Sandy Kaminsky, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
I listened to Morning Joe too, and I thought last night when I went to bed, I worked the election. I was a judge, and after a 15-hour day, I came home and I listened to the news late into the night. And like most of you, I was in pain. But by morning, when I listened to Morning Joe and I was thinking about the whole year, he's right. I think the Democratic Party is at fault. And I think she was a weak candidate and we wanted to believe she could pull this off. But she not only lost, I don't think another woman will run again in 4 years from now. I think it's ruined now for a woman next time. And we just have to look within the country and see what's going on and absorb it and just make the best of it. But he's a terrible person. We're going to have to live with him. But we have to strengthen the party. And like Morning Joe said, we have to get rid of this far left part of the party.
Well,
Because of the leftists, because of the squad, she was not strong enough for Israel. She was not strong enough for the hostages. And as much as I couldn't stand the thought of Jews voting for Trump, I think she did this. She brought this on herself.
Well, we're not going to solve all that. We'll see what unfolds in the next weeks and years. Macomb will be here for you. We will continue the good fight of sending out postcards, whatever we need to do. And, we have to regroup and that's what we will do. And again, as Rabbi Tarfon said, you can't complete it, but you can't desist. We can't just wash our hands of everything. So call and response. And I do think that it's ironic that he talked about telemarketers. Now, we were not living in a state that had repeat phone calls. Yeah. I did get asked by Kamala for $5 at least once a day. Yeah. I assume that's going to stop. I don't know. So I do think that I thought that was it was tangent to what's happening to us today because but first I thought maybe the pollsters, they never get a live person. because we're all on our cell phones. I don't have.
Call a cell. They only call a
I
landline.
only call landlines, yes, and you know, I don't have a landline, so it, you know, we're gonna have to find a different way to contact people. And I thought his way of dealing with Devora from Yes, and yes, I meant to ask my girlfriend, I think it's the only, you know, company in Israel, phone company. And the other thing you need to know is in Israel, when I was there in 79, we only had pay phones. And I was on a college campus, Hebrew U, and there were, you know, thousands of kids. There were two pay phones. There'd be long lines. And someone looks at me and says, Mi acharon bator. And they start screaming at me, and I'm like, what? And they said, who's last in line? And another guy goes, you need to learn what that means. Because I was the last person in line. I will never forget that Hebrew phrase. So, and it, to this day, it takes years and years and years in Israel to get a stationary line. Everyone has a cell phone. They give it to the kids, really for security reasons. But little kids have it when they go to school. Should something happen, they can get in contact. I'm sure that they also tag those kids. You know, you put a pin in it, you can see where they are. So I did think his, you know, his way of dealing with Devora was very funny. You know, and she wouldn't be dissuaded. Judy.
It's very interesting. Many years ago, probably 30, New York Times, the New Yorker had a cartoon that had a guy sitting at his executive desk holding a phone, and he says, never works for me. It was just, you know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Terry and then Sue, and then Abby.
Well, I really love his sense of humor. And
Great.
what I found really funny is my husband makes fun of me because we don't have a landline. We got rid of it finally. But when people would call and they'd be trying to sell me something, I always was very nice to them. Not that I necessarily would buy what they were selling, but he'd say to me, why don't you just hang up? Why do you have to even take that time, you know, to be so? And I said, well, you know, this is what they do for a living. I don't want to be rude, whatever. But the way he took it to the degree, and it was so hysterical, to the point that he pretended that he pretended that his foot was amputated, then he pretended he died, and this was, she never let up. At the end, she said, well, we have a good consolation package. I mean, actually,
Right.
it was hysterical.
Right. Well, those people are trained to do that. Sue? No, Abby.
Yeah, we started out with Terry, because I use my landline all the time. If somebody calls me on my cell phone, I usually keep it in my purse in case I need it, so I never hear it. So I do use the cell phone, and the last several weeks it's between 15 and 20 calls a day. But only one that I picked up has been political. The others, because I'm privileged to get all of these Medicare calls, and it's that time of the year. So I used to, years ago, I used to be very, very polite. And then I started to have a good time being snarky, playing with them. And I realized how dangerous that is, because they pick up the tone of your voice. And if you say something like, okay, or yeah, or just something positive. So I've really learned to be either rude or kind of not pick them up. So I've kind of I enjoyed his humor. I could relate to his humor. I like a certain amount of snarkiness. But I've learned to be a lot more careful lately in this environment.
Yeah. I think you have to, Mary.
So we still have a landline. And for a very long time, I was getting these calls that, you know, to turn on my computer, to check the computer, you know, those kind, and you know, it's really not, you're not going to do that. So I finally decided that my way out of that and to stop it, I said, you know, my son's a lawyer and he works for Google. And if I have a computer problem, I'll get someone on his staff. I did that about 4 or 5 times and I've never had another call. I got on whoever call list is.
It's much better than saying, please take me off your list. I'm going to use that next time.
My son is a lawyer, but he works for Google. He works for cities. But anyway, you know, you did.
Interesting. It's very interesting.
Now, the other ones, I always say, call me back later, I'm busy. I'm leaving the house.
Right.
Or I have a meeting, or my grandchild's crying in the background. I try to come up with something that's nice, but
Oh,
not,
I'm
but then
not-
of course they call back.
I'm not nice. I just like taking off your list. That never works.
No, they don't, it does not.
Arthur, my husband, Arthur's a lawyer. He gets very mad and he goes, I'm gonna report you. Because it is a fine.
Yes.
If you're on a do not call list and people
Yeah, it doesn't
don't
work.
call you. I also think that, no one is ever gonna ask you, over the phone or cell phone for your passwords or through email. And please, just remember that. Sue.
I have a landline and a cell phone. And I much prefer my landline because you can hear better.
Yes.
You don't get cut off when somebody's driving through a bad zone or something like that. It's much easier, I think, to talk on a landline than it is on a cell phone.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I forgot what my whole point was gonna be. I'm sorry.
Do your kids have landlines?
Yeah, let's see, yeah, two of them, but they do, actually, all three of my kids have a landline and a cell phone, but they never use their landline.
Yeah, we don't.
They're there, but they don't use
That's
them.
why we get.
And I will tell you, I know what my point was, that when I get a call from a number that I don't recognize, I never answer. I just let it go.
Yeah.
I figure
To
that,
get in touch with the doctor. Doctor's calling, you don't know the number.
Yeah.
You have to answer it.
Right.
I have just lived through that and you've got to answer every single.
but you know what?
They don't identify it because they don't want you to know.
But if it's important, they leave a message. And then you pick up your
That's true.
message.
That's
That's
true.
all, I mean, because I don't
That's true.
answer,
Except I never
even
listen.
the doctor's office will leave a message.
Right,
And then I call them back.
right.
It just, but I never answer a call that I don't recognize the number.
Elaine and then Sandy.
Okay, one of the things as I'm listening to everyone is how we have become so isolated and so frightened in our world. I mean, I cannot imagine my mother or my grandparents not picking up. I agree with you. We don't pick up the phone and we're very cautious. How our world has changed.
Yes.
And it's not a good thing. We're all afraid it's them or us.
Right.
And that's the way we are nowadays.
Yeah.
And that is very, very sad.
Sandy, I'm unmuting you. Oh,
Yeah.
there you go. Go ahead. Particularly this
Yeah. I'll tell you the truth.
Yes, yes.
I don't know what's happened to me, but I'm not frightened about anything like that. But the worst calls are the ones that pretend to be from the firemen, the police, or other workers like that tell you their story, about the widows and everything that they're taking care of. Those are almost all scams. My daughter is a retired policewoman. She said, do not talk to them. Don't give them any information. Just say, get me off your list, sound angry and hang up. Don't even spend more than 10 seconds.
I don't want them to hear my voice.
I think you're right. Terry, then Abby.
Well, I just think it's interesting because of what you said about how our world has changed and we're frightened because my grandmother, who ended up living with us after my grandfather died, was so concerned about talking on the phone because she thought someone was listening because she was from the, party lines. So she just assumed someone else is on the phone listening. And we used to say, there's no one else on the phone, but we could never convince her. It was very interesting.
Listen, when my parents moved to Crystal Lake, they lived on a farm and they had a party line. So, and that was 1960. So, I can see why. Abby, then what?
When we was little,
They were, listen, I think they were glad to have, they were glad to have a phone. Abby, then Elaine.
No,
Well,
no.
Alexa,
Sue, I meant Sue. Abby, go ahead.
okay, Alexa is listening to everything I'm saying anyway, but I kind of trust, well, first of all, what frightened me is that grandma call. first time I got that, and it sounded exactly like my grandson Joshua. Till he said grandma as opposed to Bubby, that I knew it wasn't him. But the rest of the conversation, we kept going, and I was at about, I was happy to hear somebody actually calling. But the other thing that I find frustrating, because my kids do not have landlines, is if you want to call and see how everybody is, you have to make a decision. Or even an anniversary, do you call the daughter-in-law? Do you call the son? Who do you call
That's a
first?
whole-
And who's the
That's a big
company,
issue.
the pecking
No,
order? So I find it diplomatically.
Exactly,
uncomfortable.
exactly, that's what I do.
Yeah. So
It's a spec-
two things. My son, my little son, who was not a big caller, he would always call the house because then he could, check, I tried to try both of you. And then he didn't call my parents a lot. And when my dad was alive, he said, how do I know this is Ethan? He turned it around on him.
Yeah.
That you're not scamming me. Okay,
Movie.
yeah.
Okay,
Real loud.
I really loved this story because between my freshman and sophomore year in college, I sold magazines. So I used to cold call. I'd get a list of people and I used to try to sell magazines by calling people in their home. And I just loved how tenacious this person was. I mean, I wish I had read this chapter when I was. It's a different world.
It is a different world, but
It's less receptive.
but that's Israeli. They don't give up. There is a tenacious part. Yeah.
And he kind of says that in that story.
Yes.
Is that time is a big issue in
Yes.
Israel.
Yes.
I mean, they look at the world through time, which we do too.
Yeah, everybody does. Yeah.
And the point is that, do you take the time to talk to somebody? Do you take the time to answer your phone?
Right.
Do you take the time to be nice? I mean,
Right.
but
Right.
to be a phoner in this environment, you have to be like iron. You can't let
Right.
things get under your skin. You just have to
Right.
keep tenaciously doing it.
Right. And the second chapter also was the way we wore. Yeah. So then he has to call the cell phone people to yell at them. And that's, getting money off. Terry.
Well, what was interesting is that he mentions Nasrallah.
Yes.
Wasn't that crazy?
It was absolutely crazy. On page 17. So is it any wonder that we're all secretly just a tiny bit relieved? Give us Iran, give us a pinch of Syria, give us a handful of Sheikh Nasrallah, and we'll devour them whole. After all, we're no better than anyone else at resolving moral ambiguities. But we always did know how to win a war. And again, wait, who said that, firing Yoav Gallant?
I did.
Judy, yeah. I mean, we know there's a symbiosis between Trump and Netanyahu. Both of them running to stay out of jail. And it'll be interesting to see, although I was thinking about Carter and the Iran hostages, that as soon as Reagan came in,
They released.
they released them. So I'm wondering, I don't know. Sandy. Oh, and then Joyce.
The thing that bothers me the most about Netanyahu, I detest the man, and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they're the triumvirate. They're really so evil. But the thing I hate the worst is that he uses the word victory a lot. There can never be a victory. They have suffered so in the country. They have suffered so. They have lost so many Israeli soldiers. They have lost friends, everything. No matter how it ever turns out, even the best will never be victory. It's an evil word he's using and promising them.
Yeah, I agree. Me. Oh, Joyce, thank you.
When we have a lot of family that lives in Israel, and we're very close with our cousins, and we talk politics with them all the time. Just one political statement. when he got in 2016, our cousin called my husband and said, now you've got your own Netanyahu.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some truth
That's
to it.
it. That's all I'm saying.
That's all you're saying.
Exactly.
Great, thanks, Joyce. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the last sentence in this chapter,
On what page are you on?
page 17,
Okay,
but we always did know how to win a war.
yeah.
I had to go back and see when this book was written.
Mhm.
And,
2015.
yeah, before. this.
yeah, and, I'm wondering if you would, this was written in 2015 or 2016. I'm not sure which.
2015.
2015, which means he probably wrote it in 2014.
Right.
Okay, but I wonder if he would write that sentence today, because they may be winning the physical war, but
Yeah.
they're losing other parts of the war.
Interesting, Judy.
I agree. I'll even go back further. I don't think there is a war that's winnable.
Hmm.
I think that we have proven to ourselves between World War I, World War II, everything that's going on in the Middle East. I do not think the concept of people believing that if I have a war, I can win it.
Yeah.
You don't win a war. You continue to make immigrants and haters, and it's not a winnable thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know Rabbi Serrata always says that, that this is not, the solution to whatever the problem is. Mary.
Okay, so when my son was in college and taking all his government political science courses, there is a major book that came out at the time, which he read and then he gave me to read. I don't know the title of it, but the whole concept is that war is never won. It's a matter of attrition. There comes a point where you've lost so many people that you give up. Or or your expense wise and economically, it doesn't make sense to keep going. It is never a sense of victory. It's a matter of someone capitulates or you come to some kind of negotiation. But so there is no victory. And it's a major cornerstone of all modern day political thought.
I had a book in college called Politics Among Nations. It was considered the titular book on politics, and it said the same thing. You have to find a different solution to work out your problems, because war doesn't help anybody. It makes some people rich, it kills most people, and it makes for enemies in further generations.
Yeah. Terry and then Ellen.
Well, I want to pose a question. When he was talking to the taxi driver and he was talking about the good old days,
Yes.
how many Israelis do we think at this point really think of that as the good old days? I mean, is that a generational thing? Do the young people have that attitude that Israel used to know how to, prosecute a war? I mean, it's
Right. I think that that's a really great question. But I also think you have to look at a couple of things. One, for our kids, Bibi Netanyahu has been in for their whole life.
Yes.
Two, so that means, and my oldest is 35, 36. She's 36. Or 35, whatever. And she definitely, has a different take on Israel. And I think that Israelis today, there are some who are, they love Bibi, and there are some who hate him. And I think because they only have a censored view, especially of Gaza. I've talked to my Israeli friends and they'd say, you see more of the destruction than we do. That, they don't let it show on the television there. And I think that because they're still in this war, you gather around the flag, so to speak. So it would be hard to suss that out. I also believe that the level of trauma in Israel will be for decades. And I had friends here, social workers, who were trying to give their, run sessions for free. But the level of trauma is high, high, high. And that summer of 2014, there was war going on. And he was, he referenced that. And, every summer I go to camp, there's lots of Israelis. And the Israelis were upset that the Americans were not as upset. And, now,
That's interesting. We could,
yeah, it was very interesting. Now, I see you, Joyce. I'll stop talking in a hot minute here. And I think that this summer, for the first time, our Israelis and our Americans had common ground over the college protests. Which everybody knew about. And look, we have kids from colleges all over the United States, and, we felt bad for them. The Israelis felt bad for them. We felt bad for the Israelis. And look, that was, 6 months ago, if you were either in the army or you're in Miluim, you're in reserves. I mean, it's just a hard life. Okay, I have Ellen, then Joyce.
well, I'm not sure.
Real loud.
Okay, given all the wars that Israel has fought since 48. Yes, they have always been great at wars, but why is that an accomplishment? I think that Israel is very opposed, and for the most part, to Netanyahu today.
Yes.
And there's protests in the streets all the
Yes,
time.
yes.
And I have cousins, and I forgot who said they had cousins, Joyce, I think, had cousins. I have cousins in Israel too. In fact, I just lost the one that's my cousin. His family is still there. He passed away a couple of weeks ago. And it's especially with all the pro-Palestine, the empathetic to the Palestinian issue. You don't have to be, a warmongering Palestinian. There's such an opportunity for peace, it seems, where Israel could set such a good example, and we don't get there. And it is it's as frustrating to me as our election that we did, in the sense that we're not making any progress. So I don't know if we're going to be social activists. That's what I'd want to work on.
Yeah, I hear you. Joyce.
Two things. One, we
hang on.
lost the video of you,
Of me?
Vanessa. Yeah, it's just the sign of Macomb. That's
Okay, let's go back. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, so let's, I'm going to. All right. I keep going, Joyce.
okay. The second thing is, no matter what Israel does in terms of a physical war, they will always lose the PR war.
Of course.
Yes,
Always.
Yeah.
here.
And there's nothing that I know of that they can do about it. The other side has always won that battle. And I mean, of course, to us, they're on the right side, but they're never going to be accepted by the world in terms of what they do. They're always going to be wrong.
All right. Oh, is it better now? Can you see me?
Yes, thank you.
And you, okay. Mary.
So we're talking about protests and how people in Israel feel. So Etgar Keret, he is on the streets every weekend. He's been there for months. He writes he writes in their publications about this. If you listen to I read part of the link you sent where the YouTube thing, whatever.
Yeah, I remember,
And he
yeah.
said, do I leave Israel or not? He is very conflicted. And you're going to read this later in the book, but it's just it's not going to give anything away. So there's an artist in Poland that has constructed a house for him, which is in an alley. It's where his parents came from, his family. And it's literally tiny. And they said to him, you can come anytime you want, and right here, it's kind of yours. This artist is doing this for other people that have these issues that he has. This is a place for you to come. he doesn't want to do that. I mean, he comes in, he could visit, I think he goes when he's on, in Europe, whatever, but the point is that he is very conflicted about his stances and how he feels. And I think that this is probably pretty typical of most Israelis, and not everybody, I'm not saying that, but many Israelis are conflicted. They love Israel, they love the place.
Yeah.
They love, and they don't know how to handle it exactly.
Yeah, so here's what it looked like in Israel last night. And they're protesting, this one on right here, after Gallant was let go. And the thing, outside, let's see, let me just put this up. Outside, Gideon Sa'ar's house, I mean, there is protest. Now, a couple of things. The Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, they vote for who the Rebbe says. So, and their birth rate is astronomical. Whereas your secular Israelis, which most of the country is, have a birth rate not unlike, our Jewish kids. So that's for me that, and that's something that's just much harder to predict. Ellen, did you want to say something?
No, I said,
You said your piece. Okay, Sandy.
It's hard to understand this, but the Haredim, the real ultra-Orthodox, often don't vote at all. The ones who are really the bad guys,
non-citizen.
the ones who support Netanyahu are the Orthodox in the West Bank. They're the Russians who got out of Russia, the refuseniks who then wound up in Israel. They are all on the far right. And there are some that are from the, from the Mizrahi group, Iraqis from Shas party. They also support him. But the rest of the people don't. The majority of people do not want him. But he has got such a hold on this coalition. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they can break it this year, because Gallant was very popular. I know my grandson, who has been serving in the reserves all this last year, he wants Gallant. And there's a couple other guys who are good too that are popular there. But it's those people, this group of Orthodox, but not necessarily like B'nai Brak or they aren't really the enemy. They aren't the far right.
Yeah, there's degrees of right, meaning how far to the right they go. And when you fly El Al, you'll see the degrees of people who have the meals that are only wrapped once in tinfoil, wrapped twice in tinfoil. And when I went with my dad, he goes, I want that one. It was wrapped twice in tinfoil. I go, Dad, you don't want it. Trust me, you don't want it.
Right.
Meryl, wait a minute, we have some more here. Meryl said, wish he had, Etgar Keret had developed the idea of the good old days. The technology of war is more complex now. Yes, in the good old days, there were not drones. They wouldn't be able to blow up all the pagers. Some of the things we're seeing is like out of a science fiction book. And which is also hard to think back to last October 7th, when their technology and information failed them so terribly. And Abby said, our grandson who went to the Trump rally in DC was surrounded by Orthodox. I think they may get the same message. Absolutely, absolutely. And they probably also vote as a bloc too. I don't think they're as numerous as, regular, I call ourselves, secular, not that anyone here is not religious. But I also think the Orthodox have a much higher birth rate. I have a cousin who had 7 kids, and her one kid, almost most of them are married. The one kid who's really right wing has 4 kids. You know, Ellen.
I think the genesis of this was I spent about 4 days in Washington DC.
Louder.
2 weeks ago, I spent 4 days in Washington DC. It was the exhibit on slavery on the bottom floor of the African.
Oh, yes. If you haven't been to that museum, it's
Amazing.
amazing.
But what I took from that was the fact that we, after all these years of our own country, and I think Israel has the same problem, we were founded on the basis of separation of church and state. And we are so away from the foundation of church and state. And actually, as depressed as we all are about the election, I think that if I could change one thing, there's a million things to change. We're all worried about reproductive rights and climate change and everything else. But if we could go back to separation of church and state, you can look at the far right and how, and if we had separation of church and state, they can observe whatever they want, but they couldn't put laws on us. And it's the same thing in Israel with the Haredi and Netanyahu being in bed with them. And it's a problem. I don't know how we get back to that, but that is should be our new
Right.
first priority.
So what I would say is it's harder in Israel.
Yeah.
Because it's a theocracy. And you have to do everything through the Rabbanut. And that's, it's the Orthodox rabbis have a monopoly, and everything with life cycle events. And we talked about, I think it wasn't here. If it isn't, stop me. When the hostages, when they knew they were dead, and then they had to have 2 funerals, and that was all the Rabbanut. And when I said to my girlfriend, she goes, "Yeah, they made more money." So it's even harder there than here, but it's something, as always, that we should, as American Jews, that we should be knowledgeable about and talk about. And maybe for a Sunday morning, I can find someone to talk about that, because it'd be very interesting. Unfortunately now, Terry.
Well, what you said made me think about on Morning Joe, which I also watched. They were saying that we were not aware of how far right this country is really has become.
Yes.
And I don't think we really had a sense of that. I think we're all kind of in a state of shock.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And obviously the concern about white supremacy and what you're talking about, separation of church and state, they want to make this country, obviously, something that we would not feel very comfortable as Jews being, living here. So
Here. Judy, then Sue.
I don't mind that there are people on the far right. They're entitled to their opinion like I am. It's hard for me to understand they're liking a man who pretends to have oral sex on stage in front of children, who makes grabbing women's bodies okay. That part of it escapes me.
shocking.
I can't get my head around it. And when their children do it, wait. Wait until their children, everyone's children, starts to mimic the hate. Look, bullying has gotten worse, and I blame him and their party. But now, what?
What's gonna come?
What is gonna come? Sue and then Abby. No, nothing? Okay. You change your mind. Abby.
Question is, if we started out with separation of church and state, and we're comparing ourselves to Israel, which I thought started out very secular, become so strong in Israel. When did that happen?
So if you look back, also being a historical buff on Israel, I can answer that question. So when Ben Gurion was there, the only prayer that they could do at the at the Independence Rally was Shechianu, and they wanted to keep the religious in the party. And they gave them, and Israel is a coalition, so they would give them education, but they gave them from the get-go that they were in charge of all the religious things. And that was their coalition and their government. And I believe, and I don't know that, as Bill Maher would say, I don't know this to be true, but I believe it. I don't know this for a fact, but I believe this to be true. It's their birth rate. You know, there's a million, they just keep multiplying. And not the Arab birth rate, also very high. Whereas again, the secular Israeli, not, their birth rate is not as high. So unfortunately, it's kind of baked, they don't have a constitution.
Right.
They have a Declaration of Independence, and a scroll, a Megillah, and it's baked right into that. And then as coalitions, as Netanyahu and all of them, frankly, they're like, oh, you take education. In Israel, there's two types of schools. It's Dati, which is religious, and Chiluni, which is secular. So baked into the recipe. Sandy, go ahead.
Well, each government that I have seen in Israel works this way with the coalitions. The Orthodox, strong right and Orthodox say, you know what? We're going to run the schools. We're going to run the medicine. We're going to run the housing authority. But you can run the finance ministry. They tell the Helionim, the seculars, you can take care of finance. You can take care of business and things like that. But we're going to take care of everything social. We're going to keep the movies closed on Friday night and Saturday. So anything, socially is controlled by the Orthodox. And like you said, with this high birth rate, it's not going to get any better because that's the deal. That's the deal.
The other deal was, Sandy, they also, the buses in many places, especially Jerusalem, don't run. And that is an imposition on the poor people. They don't have cars. They need the public bus system to get anywhere, to see friends and family on Shabbat. So it's insidious. That's the word. It's very insidious, the web that they weave. We have 3 more minutes. I know that I have a Zoom funeral at 11, which I have to run into. Well, I'm gonna, go to my office. And I just wanted to say a couple of announcements. Thank you everyone for coming. I know I feel 100% better, and hopefully as the days and weeks go on, we will continue to meet. I think it's important to be part of a community, to be part of something bigger, and everyone sitting here is. And this Sunday, there's no adult enrichment. Jim Kenny was going to come, but he is not feeling well. And he was very hopeful, and I might have to email him and say, Jim, what say you now? And then, but at 12:30, we have a program, Living and Giving, about, giving to the legacy of Macomb Solel Lakeside. And then next week, in person, 12:30, Adam Nimoy, Leonard Nimoy's son. And I hope, so I have some advanced knowledge because he's got a book. He's speaking all over, that he didn't talk a lot about his dad. And I'm like, buddy, that's why people are coming. So I'll be the moderator and I'll be asking him questions. But if you have any questions, let me know and then we can talk about it. We meet again November 20th, before Thanksgiving, and it's just good to see everybody.
So this is
Bye-bye, Apple. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Is it just a routine checkup?